Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about content creators who sell subscriptions that allow their audience to send and receive text messages from them. Most subscription strategies have a pretty straightforward value exchange. In exchange for a monthly payment, the subscriber gets access to premium content that's locked behind some kind of paywall. But what if you want to keep all your best content in front of the paywall? What could you still offer to your audience to make a monthly subscription payment worth the price of admission? Thousands of content creators have turned to platforms like Subtext, a tool that allows them to exchange text messages with their fans. Creators can either send mass texts out to their audience or get into individual conversations with subscribers. For this episode, I spoke to Subtext CEO Mike Donoghue. We talked about how his team developed the application and the different ways creators use it to generate revenue. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk briefly about this podcast. Some of you may have noticed that this is the first episode I've put out since May, but that doesn't mean I took the summer off. I spent the last several months conducting new interviews and have at least a half dozen ready to go. I also converted several episodes into long-form articles that can be read on the web. I put a lot of thought and care into producing this content, including choosing the guests, getting them on the phone to vet them, preparing questions, conducting the interviews, and editing the audio. I want to continue doing all of this for a long time, but I can't if this podcast doesn't become sustainable. To accomplish this, I need you to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. It's the only way to directly support this podcast. If you get value from what I do here, please consider a subscription. Go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, on to my interview with Mike. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Simon, my pleasure.
So you're the co-founder and CEO of a company called Subtext, which it's this great new tool that's being used by journalists and content creators. But you didn't start out in media, right? Like your first job out of college was at Career Builder?
Yeah, so it's a really funny question. And, I won't take up too much of your listeners' time to tell it. But I had actually, so I graduated from college. I grew up in Chicago. I had gotten into law school and I was summarily talked out of going to law school by all the attorneys in my family. So I got a job at Career Builder so I could literally pay my rent that month. And then, I fell in love with tech. I fell in love with being able to do BD and sales and, the rest is kind of history. So no background in journalism.
So you were working on like the business side of Career Builder?
Correct.
And then you eventually, though, did kind of transition into media. You got hired by Advance, which is this big media conglomerate that owns Condé Nast, all those magazines, and a whole bunch of newspapers. What were you were like hired in like 2011 or so, I think. Like, what were you brought on to do?
Yeah, so I'd originally run a category of the business for Advance, and then subsequently sort of expanded what it is that I was doing there. Advance has been an amazing company. I've been there for 10 years at this point. So ended up running, a few lines of the business, heading up programmatic in the really early days, video, mobile, some of the emerging tech. And then about 5 years ago, we started the Alpha Group, which is the in-house tech and media incubator for Advance.
Yeah, and when you're working at a company that large, you really get to see like all the aspects of the business. You're operating at large scale. You mentioned you were working on programmatic advertising, so you get like a firsthand look at like, top of the line ad tech and stuff like that. And I'm guessing like this wasn't a great time for the company in the sense it wasn't a great time for most traditional newspapers and stuff like that, where there was like a lot of struggle to figure out ways to, make the internet pay basically, right?
Sure. I mean, I think everybody in the industry, has had a struggle in some form or fashion. I mean, candidly, it's a business model for everybody that's had to adapt significantly over the last, call it 7 to 10 years, right? I mean, sweeping changes, obviously changes to the way that people are consuming content, what platforms are consuming that content on. And even I would say, very recently, I mean, changes in the relationship that people have felt with, the media companies where they read or otherwise engage.
And so you said you eventually within Advance, you co-founded this, I guess what it would be called, incubator called the Alpha Group. What was the origin story of that? Like, did you pitch it to Advance or did they approach you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been thinking about it for some time, and we have an amazing senior leadership team in Advance, and we identified what we thought was an area of opportunity. We brought it to the leadership team. They agreed, and we sort of took it from there.
And so, what was the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, the pitch, really broadly was that organizationally, I mean, we do a really good job of operating the existing media companies that we have. They're doing a lot of innovative things, but they're focused on their core business. And, overarchingly, the organization's done a good job of, investing in various businesses at different stages, but we did not have a function that was a small, autonomous, nimble team that could go out and identify areas of opportunity, build MVPs to be able to address those areas of opportunity, and then start to spin up businesses and intellectual property that would be owned by the company. So, it was low risk, high reward, assuming that, what it was that we were building, would be viable and could find a home.
So there was this constant criticism that you heard starting in like the mid 2000s from like these kind of media gurus like Jeff Jarvis and stuff, where they constantly criticized mainstream media because they were like, well, you're complaining about Facebook, you're complaining about Craigslist. You should have been inventing Facebook, or you should have been like, why weren't you there to actually meet the market? And that's kind of what I think about when I think about the Alpha Group. It's like, it's just this group that's given kind of autonomy, right, to kind of think outside the box and think like, what is the next generation media company going to look like? And it's probably not going to look like a traditional newspaper or something like that. Like it has that kind of approach, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it. Although, we've never really limited our scope in terms of what we wanted to pursue as opportunities to just that sort of narrow subset of like, what is a new media company going to look like? I mean, I think you see this with Subtext, right? Is, we built a platform here that obviously solves, a lot of issues that exist in the media world, but at the same time, I mean, it's a very extensible platform. It's applicable for creators. It's applicable for artists. It's applicable in the political space. So, I mean, we've looked at problems that we could solve sort of holistically, with the idea that yes, I mean, we have a lot of learnings. We've been through a lot, as a media company, so it's easy to identify pain points there and sort of build from there.
And the idea is that like, you will start kind of creating like an MVP within the Alpha Group, but then if it becomes successful enough, then it gets spun out as its own subsidiary of Advance, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the way that we've always approached it, and I'll give you a little bit on like the origin story of Subtext because I think it's interesting. But we as consumers, right? So me and my team, me and the three other folks that are on the Alpha Group team, I mean, we've always sat down and sort of listed out, hey, what are the issues? What are some of the things that as consumers, we wish somebody was solving for us, right? And once we've identified a problem, we try and identify, what the potential solution would look like. But we start with like really, really high level hypotheses. So, in the case of Subtext, the problem that we were solving for was that media companies, creators, artists, really anybody who is working to build an audience of dedicated fans or people that really wanted to engage with them in a meaningful way, most people were pouring a ton of time and effort and resource and money and love into building up these huge social followings, when in reality, they didn't own any of those relationships, right? They were renting them from the social platforms, and algorithm shifts and monetization policies and toxicity and questionable data practices, all of that made for a really, really shaky foundation on which to build your business. And if that business is predicated on engagement with your audience or your fans, it wasn't a really good way to do it. So, that was kind of the original hypothesis that we had around the product. And then we said, what is going to be the most minimally viable way to be able to test this hypothesis? And see whether or not there's real market fit for this, or if it's just the four of us in a dark room trying to come up with something that we think is interesting, but maybe nobody else would agree with us on.
And so we'll talk about Subtext more in a second, but like, what are some of the other applications that you've built within Alpha Group? I think there was one that you spun out that's like a polling company, like an online polling type outlet or something like that.
Yeah. So we built the Tilt, which is sort of a social, opinion platform, a polling platform that, was a great product. I mean, it did, a tremendous amount of audience growth. And, we thought it was a really effective way for people to be able to express their opinions on, the topics that mattered to them. And it was a really participatory platform. And, we really liked what we did there. We had another product called Elsewhere, which was effective. I think you could think of it really kind of as like a video meme generation app, right? So, we looked at the space and we said, well, a lot of the communication that's happening, depending on your demographic, obviously, but a lot of the communication that's happening out there, a lot of the ways that people are expressing themselves are through memes. And there's a high barrier to entry in terms of like being able to craft like high quality, compelling, funny, interesting memes. So we actually built in iOS and Android the ability for people to take sort of a snippet of video and to like really professionally like caption it with all the effects and that type of thing, and then export that to the social platforms and that type of thing. So that was a lot of fun as well.
And so with Subtext, you said that like you wanted to develop a way for people to have or these creators to have unfettered access to their fans that isn't controlled by an algorithm. What you settled on was SMS text messages, basically a really easy way for fans to throw out a phone number or a URL and people to sign up for a list and be able to exchange text messages with them. So let's talk about that. Like, so when did you start building this product?
Yeah. So I think the product really kind of in its current implementation is about 2.5 years old.
Uh-huh. And then originally it was very lightweight, right? Like it was literally just getting like a burner phone or something like that and sending out and allowing like I don't know, something very simple.
Oh
like
no,
that, right?
our terrible secret. Yeah. So the original implementation of the product. I mean, Simon, when I say we build MVPs, we build MVPs, right? So like in this instance, we wanted to test SMS. We wanted to test that level of engagement between a journalist in our first instance and their audience. So we built a splash page where someone could enter a phone number. We found an amazing journalist out in San Francisco named Joe Eskenazi, who covered sort of the intersection of tech and politics in San Francisco for Mission Local. And we said, hey, Joe, we got this crazy idea. Do you want to pilot it with us? And he was like, yep, sounds crazy, but let's give it a shot. So we put together the splash page. We said, look, this is what Joe's going to be reporting on. You can expect him to send, this many messages in a given day. Are you in? And we had a ton of people sign up really quickly. So,
and that would just go into like a spreadsheet or something like that.
100% was going into a spreadsheet. Yeah. We added Joe to our free instance of Slack, and Joe would Slack us the message that he wanted to send to all of the subscribers that day. We bought a burner phone with a San Francisco area code, and David Cohn, who's on our team, who's one of the co-founders as well, would literally send out these messages one by one from the phone every day. And then as people started getting back to us, with questions and the like, we would Slack Joe and we'd say, hey, Joe, this subscriber has a question about this particular, policy. What should we tell him? And he was like, yeah, tell him this. This is what I know. And people loved it, right? So, as soon as we saw what the uptake was and like the really early traction, we knew that, not only would we have to build a platform, but we would have to go ahead and build all the monetization tools and analytics and everything else that come along with, doing this as a real business, as opposed to some guys with a burner phone and a free Slack instance.
Yeah, so that's not scale. That what you just described isn't scalable at all. What you eventually built was like a web dashboard that the creator logs into. Like the creator isn't even sending the text messages out using their phone; they are on the web dashboard, and it's like a basically like a very simple kind of like CMS publishing thing where they type it into a field what they want to send out, and they they hit a button that says like broadcast or something like that, and then that presumably then sends it out to everyone who's signed up. And then if users respond, it goes into this dashboard. There's like an inbox that almost looks like an email inbox, and the creator can basically send messages back and forth. So while the end user, they're seeing those messages coming in via text message, to the creator, it's just basically almost like an email inbox, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the easiest way to picture it is probably a sort of hybrid between a lightweight CMS and a typical email client that people would be used to using. So we try and make it super straightforward, right? We want to be able to get our hosts signed into the platform, creating a broadcast in 3-5 minutes, sharing whatever media that they'd like to be able to share as a broadcast on those subscribers. And then, give those subscribers the very real and simple ability to send a message back, and then to, theoretically strike up a dialogue with the host there, which has, been a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, we keep it very straightforward and lightweight because we know, I mean, any creator, any journalist, there's any number of platforms where you have to dedicate a tremendous amount of your time every day. And if we can make this simple and lightweight, we can make it part of the daily diet for all of our users.
So when did you spin it out as its own company, and then you decided to become CEO of it? So like what was the decision-making process there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we really kind of took stock of the products that we had in the portfolio. We looked at sort of where we had the most traction, and if we were going to focus our efforts on one where we had the best chance of hitting a home run, it was pretty clear that Subtext was going to be that product. So me and the co-founders, so the original members of the Alpha Group, became the senior leadership team for Subtext. And that's where we've been spending all of our time for the past, I'd say 2 years almost.
So there are two different versions of Subtext. There's one that's free to the end user and the content creator is shouldering the costs. And then there's another that's that costs money to the end user and there's a revenue share. What's the difference between those two options?
Yeah, so I mean, the difference is really predicated on what the goal of the host is here. So our creator, or the media companies, or the artists that we work with. So for the free option, typically the goal is either to facilitate broad engagement with the general public, right? So anybody can sign up to receive the text messages. You want to be able to strike up a dialogue with your biggest fans and sort of give them insider access to you as a creator. And that's a very straightforward implementation. In a lot of instances, though, we have, especially in the media space, we have a lot of clients that are using this as sort of a supplement to their existing digital subscription products, as a means of activating subscribers, hopefully, doing away with a sort of zombie subscriber status, and having it be a value add, right? I mean, it's a really compelling way to be able to engage with your readers, and also to be able to generate feedback, right? I mean, to be able to open up a dialogue with folks. I think, we've been doing this for a long time. I mean, we've sent over 3 billion messages. We've got, almost 900,000 subscribers on the platform at this point. And, one of the things that we've seen on the macro level, especially, in terms of like business KPIs, is that we've been able to reduce subscriber churn by 35 or 40%. When someone is a Subtext subscriber associated with an existing digital subscription product, which for most media companies is a very meaningful metric.
Yeah, so like if there's a newspaper that charges $15 a month for access to their digital products, they can send out this announcement and say like, hey, here's an additional benefit. We have this crack sports reporter, and he's participating on this text messaging platform, and here's how to activate it so that it's connected to your subscription, right? How hard is that?
It's super simple. I mean, it's literally, literally providing the phone number and in some instances verifying the phone number. But in a lot of use cases that we have, we actually integrate directly into the digital subscription platform for clients. So, you basically enter your phone number, you check a box that says, hey, I want to receive updates on the New York Knicks and the Rangers and the Islanders. You hit confirm, and then we use our API to opt you into the subscriptions for each one of those content channels, and you're good to go. So, for us, we should remove every conceivable barrier to entry to get people opted in.
And then the other version is a revenue share where a creator's like, this is how I want to actually monetize my content, is offer the ability to text message with my paying subscribers. What's the kind of onboarding process? Is it the creator saying, text this phone number, and then then it will send them an automatic prompt where they can click on a link and then enter their payment information? Or what's that kind of onboarding process look like?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. You nailed it. So it's as simple as sharing the phone number. So each one of our hosts is given an individual local phone number. People can text that number. And if you text into it and you're not a subscriber, we bounce you back a URL. You go to the URL, you enter all the requisite information. So credit card, zip code, phone number, name, everything that we need to collect in order to be able to process the payment. And then, assuming everything goes through, you're opted in to receive those messages, and we just bill on sort of a subscription basis. So kind of akin to Substack in that sense, except, with bilateral communication, probably a lower barrier to entry in terms of content creation. And really, I think interesting, unique engagement in terms of the medium.
So let's talk about the practical application, because I think a lot of people, when they hear about this, they assume that the content creator has to be constantly responding to people's texts, and so they think it's not a fair value exchange. Like if someone's paying $4 a month, should I have to respond to every text message they send me? You could see where that could add up to a lot of time. That's worth a hell of a lot more than $4 a month. But based on I had actually had a previous podcast interview for this podcast with someone who was using this platform really successfully. It's not like that kind of one-to-one communication, even though it is over text.
You're exactly right. I mean, it certainly doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be as intimate, or it can be as scalable as you'd like to be able to make it. And certainly, I mean, we outfit any of our hosts with tools to be able to respond to people one-on-one in a really quick and seamless way. So if that's responding with templates, if that's sharing media, if that's creating addressable audiences within the platform based on what people have identified as their affinities, so you can send better tailored messaging to larger groups. Those are all things you can do. But the truth of the matter is that there's no expectation that every single individual message be responded to one-on-one. I mean, to put this in context, we work with Sony Music, right? And all the artists on Sony Music record labels. And these are massive fan bases, right? And really passionate fan bases that, given the opportunity, would love to be able to strike up a one-on-one conversation with any of these artists. But what we always tell people is that, it's important to give the audience the understanding that you are, in fact, listening to them, that you're reading the responses that are coming in. And even if you're not getting back to each person individually, if you're getting a lot of the same question, if you're getting some really insightful questions, we find that it's a really effective use case to send a broadcast out to the audience and say, hey, I'm hearing from a ton of you that you have questions around A, B, or C. Let me go ahead and address those, right? And it's an effective way to address the group at scale while still indicating that you're listening and you're engaging with people. But you can do it both ways. I mean, we had Matthew Iglesias do effectively a live Q&A or AMA around the presidential debates when he was still at Vox. And, it was fascinating. I mean, people love the idea that, oh my gosh, it's Matthew texting me about this topic that he's exceedingly knowledgeable on, and he's answering my questions. I mean, that personal touch can go a really, really long way. And we always we tell our hosts, look, if you respond to an individual subscriber one-on-one, you've probably got a subscriber for life, right? I mean, people appreciate it.
Well, I think and you may disagree with me, but I think one of the best applications of this is crowdsourcing for some kind of broadcast medium like podcast or YouTube.
Yeah.
Like YouTubers already do regular what they call Q&As where they blast out their Twitter followers, hey, I'm shooting a Q&A video. What questions do you have for me? These are super popular videos. I've definitely sat through them. Then they'll just basically answer questions one by one for like 20 to 30 minutes until they run out of time. And same thing with like podcasts. So like one of the best examples of this sports podcaster. And he said that like basically like throughout the day, whenever there's news about his local team, he's sending out text messages, about analysis of whatever news is breaking that day. And maybe, he's responding to some individual text, but he doesn't feel the need to respond to everyone. But then he hosts his podcast, and he has like an entire segment of his podcast, which is just dedicated to basically subscriber questions, where he used to crowdsource that from Twitter, but now you can only have your question read on air if you're subscribed to his subtext. And that just creates like great content for him. And it's more scalable because a question isn't just going to him, it's going out to his entire audience. And then he's answering it in front of his entire audience. And it creates a great feedback loop because then he gets to plug the the phone number for his subtext. So it's creating a feedback loop where they're sending him great questions that are creating great content, but then he's able to send more and more of his listeners to that phone number so that they can sign up and become for like a free trial and then convert into paying subscribers. Like, I don't know. What do you think about that as probably one of the best use cases of this product?
Simon, I'm glad we're recording this because I'm gonna need to take that snippet and float it by the marketing team and the sales team. No, I mean you're absolutely right. Right. It's like that's one of the beauties of the platform is the idea that, not only can you create this sort of compelling feedback loop and you can source all these questions, but you can pay it off for the audience in the sense that like they might get to ask a question of someone that they would have never had the opportunity to meet or interact with. Right. So I'll give you an example. Newsday is a client of ours on Long Island, and Newsday had landed an interview with Dr. Fauci. Right. And Newsday has been running a really big campaign associated with, keeping people up to speed with regards to what's going on Long Island related to COVID. And they asked their subscribers, I think they had about 5,000 plus at the time. They said, look, if you could ask Dr. Fauci one question, what would it be? And I think they got almost 5,000 responses to the prompt that they put out via text. And they were able to answer these questions, and they were able to let people know, look, this is this is an interesting way for you to be able to voice your opinion and to participate in, the journalism that we're undertaking here. And at the same time, I mean, you referenced Twitter, right? It's sort of maybe the de facto platform that people would have used to do this previously. And the truth is, because Twitter is a public platform and because it's performative, there's a lot of people that either A, don't use Twitter, or B, are unwilling to publicly share the question that they would want answered, right? So because this communication is private, I think you get a lot more candor. I think you get a lot more humanized responses from individual subscribers because it is that much more intimate, right? You don't have to worry about what somebody else thinks about the question that you want answered. You simply get to ask it of someone who is exceedingly knowledgeable on the topic that makes a difference in your life.
So if you look at like one of the big reasons that Substack has been so successful is because they were so good at writer recruitment. There was like a 6-month period where if you were a writer of any prominence, you got an email from Hamish McKenzie, who's one of the co-founders of Substack. And they were just really good at, reaching out and having that relationship. What has your strategy been for getting content creators on board? Like obviously you work for Advance, so maybe you have some inroads with like these newspaper reporters and stuff like that. What's your strategy for getting in the door and getting people to test out this product?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've really, I think one of the big differences between the approach that we've taken and maybe the approach that Substack has taken is that we've been working a lot more at sort of the enterprise media company level, right? In order to create partnerships with the parent company, and then to explore like various different use cases under that umbrella. So, we might work with somebody like BuzzFeed on the commerce side. We might work with some of their journalists at BuzzFeed News, and we have to do, some really compelling sort of audience engagement campaigns on the platform. We might do event-based campaigns with a different team at the organization. So that's kind of the tack that we've taken. Although we certainly work with several individual journalists who have paid campaigns on the platform that are really similar to Substack. But yeah, I mean, we try and go out and find people that we think are really interesting, that are passionate and engaging, and maybe a different voice, that are covering an area that has a really passionate fan base. And we hope they decide to join us on the platform because it's really telling. It's been a lot of fun.
What are some of your favorite use cases, both from kind of larger enterprise accounts and individual creators? Like, what are some of the things you love the site when you're, going to O&A or some other thing where you have to like present in front of people, this is how people are using Subtext in a really cool way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I always tend to, and maybe this is just me, but I always tend to love the use cases that draw the audience into, well, two use cases. One that draws the audience into the experience and allows them to participate. So I think of, some of the work that we've done recently with Vanity Fair associated with their Little Gold Men podcast, which is, an amazing podcast they do that is, related to award season and everything else that comes along with it. But I mean, they have this hugely passionate, dedicated listener base, and they're constantly reaching out. They're constantly taking questions. They're constantly engaging with people on the platform. And it's so encouraging to see, because the health of these conversations, the candor of these conversations, the tenor of them, I mean, they're using the platform in a really exemplary way to both humanize the media company and, the individuals that host the podcast, but also to make the content come to life for listeners in a way that, it would be really difficult for that to come to life any other way. And then I'm thinking,
what are they doing? Like, they're asking like who should win Best Picture, and then reading those text messages on the podcast, or like.
Yeah, I mean, they're polling users. They're doing live sort of Q&A when award season is coming up. They're even giving sort of snippets and insights into what's going to be on the next episode. They're asking for feedback related to the latest episode that they just put out there. So they've created this really interesting sort of participatory loop of audience feedback, participation, and engagement. And to your point earlier, I mean, it's helping them sort of evolve the product that they have, the audio product that they have.
So what about the creator side? Do you have any interest in any like individual creators who are using it in cool ways?
Yeah, I mean, we have a ton. So I'm thinking through an artist that we work with from Sony. So it's a band, really, really well-liked band, and really engaging. I mean, just like interesting folks. And, they're sharing out photos from their everyday life and sort of the behind the scenes for them, what they're doing in the studio, what they're doing on before they go on stage. But they're also doing things for fans like, trivia night, for example, on Friday, where they're asking questions, you can respond with your answers. And they're like using the platform in this really participatory, different way, and that's been a ton of fun to see. It's like they're really allowing people behind the curtain in terms of what it's like to be a part of the band, what it's like to be on the road, and it's something that you typically would not see on any of the traditional social platforms.
I guess you kind of touched upon this before, but I want to kind of drive home this point. Is it can be like a way that like users get a lot of value, or subscribers get a lot of value, but is not super onerous on the content creator. Like, I run a Substack and I have to devote at least, a lot of time to creating content that goes behind paywall that's like decently well polished, decently well written, and takes up like a decent amount of time. Whereas with Substack, like if you wanted to, you could build it into your day where you are subtext. I say Substack, subtext. You can build it. You could build it into your day where you literally only log on for 1 hour a day, and maybe you send out like 1 or 2 text messages that are broadcast to all, and then you spend the rest of that hour just responding to individual text messages until that hour runs up, and then you just stop and then don't log in till the next day, right? Like it's not like it's not like super highly polished content or anything like that. And that's kind of like a selling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try and make the barrier to communication really, really low, right? And I think that's one of the interesting things is because people are coming to a platform like this to create a more personal, intimate connection with the host, right? I mean, you're not coming here for a 2,000 word think piece or something like that. I mean, you want to be able to have this conversation. You want to be able to get information delivered to you in like a really sort of palatable, short, easily consumed way. So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's really, really simple to log in. It's simple to be able to draft an individual text. And if that text is going to be a prompt and you're getting a lot of responses, it's really easy to just spend 30 minutes in the platform getting back to people one-on-one, and then to move on with your day. I mean, it doesn't require a tremendous amount of research. It doesn't require a tremendous amount of art. There's no coding or anything like that. It's really you putting your personality and your voice and your knowledge on display. In a way that is, really simple for people to consume. And I think, if we look at ROI all the time, right, in terms of like time spent and the percentage of people that are seeing your message. I mean, the open rate on our platform is 92%, right? So if it takes 10 minutes to draft and send a text to all of your subscribers, and 92% of those subscribers open it via SMS, how does that ROI compare to spending hours and hours and hours to create an email newsletter to send to your subscriber base to only have, maybe 30, 40, 45% of those subscribers read it, especially if they don't have the ability to respond to what it is that they've read and strike up a conversation with you. So I think there's some really interesting ROI metrics at play as well.
And so you built it on SMS text messages, which is great because it's a decentralized distribution that works on every single mobile phone. So it's great in the same way that email is great, that it's decentralized, so nobody controls it. I know, like, this is where I'm kind of ignorant, but I know, like, back in the 2000s, text messages were really expensive to send. Like, the telecoms would pay, if you didn't have, like, an actual text message plan, they would charge you, like, 10 cents per text message or something like that. But from what I understand, like, now that there are all these competing messaging apps and stuff like that, like, SMS is a lot cheaper. What are some of, like, the logistics of dealing with an application that's built on SMS? Like, do you run into any problems with various telecom carriers? Do you run in problems in terms of overseas text messages? I was actually testing out Subtext, where I was like, you guys asked me to come on as a host for this specific media focused Subtext, and one of my text messages didn't go out to everyone because I don't know if it got flagged as like spam or something. Like, what are some of the logistics that you have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, to your first question. There's always, I mean, I think there's always been this perception that like, oh, SMS is, this cost prohibitive medium, and, to do it at scale is this, huge financial lift. And the truth is, I mean, you're right. That's no longer the case. I mean, especially on a platform like ours, where we're operating at a really massive scale. I mean, we sent 3 billion messages in the last 12 months. So, we have a lot of bargaining power and a lot of ability to negotiate our rates and make sure that, it's totally affordable and totally approachable for anyone at any given level. And then from a technical standpoint, I mean, it's really, there's a lot of work that goes into building the APIs and the platform, and making sure that the communication is seamless. But the truth is, and I think, Simon, you would have seen this when you used the platform, and you were an amazing host, by the way, thank you. But I mean, part of the beauty, I think in what it is that we do is we take something that's very complicated in terms of sending broadcast SMS, and make it elegant and simple and very approachable for users. I mean, our onboarding typically takes about 5 minutes, right, or 10 minutes to show somebody how to use the platform to, the best of their ability. And there's always logistical things that we deal with, but I think one of the most encouraging things that we've seen most recently is that the telecom carriers, notably T-Mobile and AT&T, have asked the entire messaging ecosystem to move to a system more aligned with what it is that we do at Subtext, which is sending registered traffic via 10DLC, as opposed to, say, sending spammy, unregistered, unopted in traffic via shady short codes or toll-free numbers or something like that. So there's a big shift in the industry right now to clean up messaging and operate more like Subtext does, which is certainly a great thing for us.
And what about the filters? Like it seemed clear that one of my text messages didn't go through to everyone. Are they are they scanning, like looking for spammy words or anything like that?
Yeah, it's typically not even spammy words. Although I mean there's certain phrases. I mean these are big neural networks that any of the carriers typically use to determine what is a spam message. I think in the instance of you sending your message that would have gotten filtered, the highest likelihood is because it's a really small audience, we don't pre-register that traffic, right? So, if we have a larger client, if we have, someone who's going to be sending 100,000 plus messages in a given month, we actually take all of that traffic directly to the carriers ahead of time. And we say, hey, look, this is 100% opted in traffic. Here's the businesses that are associated with sending this messaging. Give us the green light to make sure that we don't have any of this filtered. So while we don't control it 100%, because it's up to the individual cell carriers to determine what messages get delivered, I can tell you that we deliver our messaging at over 99.999%. It's rare to have a message filter.
And obviously we've had a huge rise in messaging apps, everything from Facebook Messenger to WhatsApp to Twitter, even Twitter DM or whatever. Yeah. Do these apps typically have any kind of API or anything like that you could see that Subtext is working on plugging itself into in case that's how they want to receive the messages, or is this going to be 100% SMS?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. It's something that we always look at, although I'm very weary of leaning on other people's platforms to deliver our messaging, particularly when we have a relatively ubiquitous platform and broad SMS that we can deliver through today. So, if you look at Facebook's like messaging, Twitter's DMs, WhatsApp, that type of thing, I mean, they all apply their own standards, their own filters, their own controls to these things. And, we look at it and say, well, if our mission is to be able to create the most direct personal connection possible and create the most ownership for our hosts, for our creators, we're very weary to rely on somebody else's platform to do that, simply because then, we're forced to have to play by their rules, which, can put our clients at risk and can, have a lot of decision-making driven by a party that's not our client or their subscribers, which we don't particularly love. And you touched on the email ecosystem before, which I think is really interesting, right? I mean, we all saw Apple's announcement at WWDC right around, starting to do away with, some of the metrics in terms of their email app and whether or not people are going to get open rates or additional messaging and that type of thing. I mean, that's a really good example of somebody who still, even though we think of email as this sort of fully owned, direct line of communication, you still got somebody like Apple who's making a lot of decisions around, what messages are delivered, what data individual creators are getting as a part of their messaging. So there's always somebody who is controlling something. Not to sound like a total conspiracy theorist, but it's hard to get as pure of a line of communication as you get with SMS.
And, there's so much competition heating up in the creator economy space. Every platform is copying each other in terms of features and stuff like that. I could totally see Patreon, especially, but several other platforms rolling out an SMS component. Do you kind of have like a long-term strategy to try to adapt, to expand into new things? Like, I feel like every creator economy type monetization platform is trying to offer more and more kind of bells and whistles. Are you kind of anticipating that at all?
Yeah, I mean, of course, look, it's always something that we consider, if that's a new entrant into the space, if that's going to be horizontal movement into SMS messaging from somebody who's an existing, player in the creator economy, that type of thing. The truth is, building a platform like Subtext that is as powerful and intricate and elegant as it is a very, very difficult lift. I mean, this is not something from a technical standpoint that, you just release overnight and you cross your fingers and you hope that it works. So, we're always working really diligently to make sure that, one, we're competitively differentiated in the space, two, that we're doing the most for our creators to keep them happy with the platform. But, at the same time, we also look at, our strategic opportunities related to integrating into any of these existing platforms, right? So if that's a Patreon, if that's a Substack, if that's, any other creator platform where people are spending time, we always look at our opportunities there. It's something that we regularly consider.
So you mean like instead of Patreon launching their own, they might create some kind of integration with Subtext, is what you're
exactly
saying. Okay, well, Mike, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
So I'm incredibly boring, and actually I kind of live up to the anti-social platform hype. So I think maybe the best place to find me is LinkedIn. You can just enter my name there, Mike Donoghue. And we'll be glad to connect with everybody, share some thoughts, and really enjoyed the time, Simon. This is great.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast. So if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.